even know how we're going to do all this today. Can we do it in one day? This might be 2 days. It might be one day. I don't know. I got a couple things I need to tell you about on the front end here. Number one, my voice. I did the Skittles game today with a bunch of high school kids. It's a game that I made up several years ago that you play with Skittles, and the Skittles represent resources, and you give them to the kids and you don't tell them what anything means. And then you start being like, all right, now this happened. And you got 30 seconds to figure out how to get the right number of resources to survive this upcoming event. And you create all this tension. And eventually what happens is feudalism. They form up into ranks with different people having to pledge the resources they earn on successive turns to more powerful people. And you just develop a monarchy. It's very fun. It went really well, but it was loud, and I was trying to yell a lot so they could hear me. Now my voice sounds all crispity, crunchity, and well, it is what it is. So that's thing number one we got to talk about. Thing number two we got to talk about. I had designs on getting us into this really dramatic, cinematic even scene that starts in verse 11 of Nehemiah chapter 2, and it was going to be good. I'm in a cinematic mood. I saw a great movie this weekend. And now I'm thinking in those categories. But it's going to have to wait because we're just not there yet, because I got into the whole Quagmire. There's a Quagmire going on. Then I'm mucked up in it, and I'm going to introduce you to the Quagmire. It's going to happen here in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 10. We'll see if we can get through the whole thing today. If we can't, it'll be a 2-day Quagmire, but it's a really fun Quagmire that's going to take us into all kinds of interesting history things. So here's what we got. Nehemiah has a chit-chat with the king. The king totally goes for it. All the terms, great. You get to go do it. They worked out the receipts. They got everything in writing. Block, stock, done. Everything's good to go. Nehemiah's going to go on the trip. The conversation between Nehemiah and the king ends, and then at the very end of verse 8, we get this little tag that is a keen reminder. I'm not going to beat this dead horse. I think you all get it. We covered it a lot in Esther, but it's a keen reminder that Nehemiah is different thematically than Esther. It's strategically different from Esther. Esther doesn't mention God, but clearly it's a book about the providence of God. Even when God is not mentioned, God can move the hearts of kings. So in that book, God just moves Xerxes' heart wherever he wants it to go. God is in charge of all these crazy flukes and circumstances that maybe aren't such flukes and circumstances after all. It's great, just wonderful. That's why we did a whole season on it. But Nehemiah, well, God's on every page. You know, he's just all over the place. And we get Nehemiah's prayers to God. He's fasting and praying to God, and he's addressing God, oh Lord. And then when he's talking with the king, he says, I prayed to the God of heaven. It could not be more different in the first chapter and a half here. One of the themes would clearly seem to be God is also in charge of everything when his name is on screen and when his name is on everybody's lips. What do you know? He's also in charge of everything. And in the same way, God was able to move the heart and direct King Cyrus and King Darius and King Xerxes. Well, surprise, there's nothing different about King Artaxerxes. He's the king. He's the dude. God can do what he wants with him to make history unfold the way he wants it to unfold. And Nehemiah is very overt about that. In Nehemiah 2, second half of verse 8, it goes like this. And because the gracious hand of my God was upon me, the king granted my requests. Boom. There you go. Pretty clear. Verse 9. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. I cannot tell at this point whether we're already in Jerusalem or on the trip to Jerusalem. You'll see in a minute that is a touch ambiguous here. It is possible that all this conversation got worked out in the citadel at Susa, and then it just so happened that the appropriate governors and officials were together for maybe like Christmas party or some sort of annual planning meeting at the conference center. Maybe they brought in a keynote speaker, and they all had badges and lanyards or something. And so Nehemiah was able to just run down the hall to one of the conference rooms and give the little clay shards to all the appropriate governors and be like, hey, the king wanted me to give you that. I'm going to go to Jerusalem. You're the governor of Trans-Euphrates. There's the thing. There's that. That's how it is now. Or maybe we're just jumping around a little bit here timeline-wise, and he's already made the trip all the way to Jerusalem, and we're just jumping. I mean, it kind of works either way. But verse 10 is where we get into the Quagmire, and it's just because of one name. One name is going to take up 2 days of our conversation. I can already tell it's going to be 2 days. It says, when Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite official, heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. Verse 11, I went to Jerusalem and after staying there 3 days, ... And we'll get into that later on. So timeline-wise, real quick, just put a bow on it. 3 different ways I think you could read this. Number 1, the appropriate officials were back at the home office in Persia, and Nehemiah had this conversation with just a walk down the hall to them. Way number 2, Nehemiah stopped by Nineveh. We know from Herodotus, the ancient historian, that Nineveh was a part of this particular province of Trans-Euphrates, or the land beyond the river. We know that there are other prominent cities there, Rehoboth. I don't know if he stopped any of these towns, but maybe he stopped at an administrative center on his way to Jerusalem. And even though this doesn't seem like an account of a journey, it's actually accounting for a stop or 2 along the way. Or way number 3 is the whole journey happened. He just went to Jerusalem. He just told us about what happened a little bit when he got there, that he delivered the things, and then he's kind of bouncing back like I do sometimes verbally to just be like, okay, so anyways, I went to Jerusalem and then this. Really, it doesn't matter much to the story one way or the other. What does matter is that name, Sanballat. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. Well, first of all, this name matters because it looks like he's shaping up to be a problem. It looks like he's not keen on what Nehemiah is there to do. Maybe he's a little bit threatened. Maybe this Sanballat guy has, frankly, a different vision for how to handle the administration of things, where everything's supposed to be located. We'll get into more of that either later on in this conversation or next time around. But the other reason his name matters is because this is one of the names in the Old Testament that is extra biblically verified. Now, that's not that big a deal when you're talking about a great king, Esarhaddon or Ashurbanipal or Xerxes or Artaxerxes or Cyrus or Darius. I mean, there's no surprises there. These are huge names. Of course, they're going to be extra biblically verified. But when you get somebody like Sanballat, who apparently was a mid-ranking governor of a sub-region of a larger administrative region, well, it's kind of a big deal, and it gives you a pretty specific time frame for the most part. And that's where the conundrum, or the quagmire, comes in, is it seems like the timeline gets a little bit wishy-washy here with our extra biblical sources, particularly with a source we've depended on a lot, a guy named Josephus, who is writing about 500 years after the events you and I are looking at in Nehemiah and Ezra. Josephus is a Jew who saw the writing on the wall. Maybe that pun was a little bit intended, and decided to jump sides over to the Romans. And so Josephus is writing against the historical backdrop of the destruction of the very temple at the hands of the Roman Empire that Ezra is writing about being built in the first place. Did that sentence work? I don't think it totally worked. Ezra's writing about the second temple getting built. Josephus, 500-ish years later, is writing about the second temple getting destroyed. So they kind of bookend the subject matter that we're looking at here. Now, Josephus gives us a bunch of reliable stuff, but you and I have also found, if you've been hanging out with me for any amount of time, that like all ancient historians, there's some places where you might have a few questions. Herodotus has some places where it certainly raises a historical eyebrow, and Josephus gets weird on us timeline-wise when we get into this stuff about Ezra and Nehemiah and this one random dude, Sanballat. But we have another source on Sanballat that is not after the fact. I mean, Josephus referencing Sanballat isn't actually that big a deal because it's 500 years after the fact. Josephus is no doubt drawing on the Bible, Ezra and Nehemiah, as a source. So that's interesting and compelling, but what would be more interesting is if somebody referenced Sanballat from source documents, original documents like receipts or court records or something from the time that he was in power as governor of Samaria. And in fact, we have that. There's a collection of documents found about 200 years ago called the Elephantine Papyri. Those are from Egypt, near the border fortress of Elephantine. And these papyri cover a 100-year span from roughly the beginning of the Persian Achaemenid Empire, Cyrus the Great, up until a little ways after the stuff we're looking at here, a little ways after the reign of Artaxerxes. So this is super relevant and super interesting. And tomorrow, we're going to look at what the extra biblical sources tell us about this guy. So we'll have that in our hip pocket as we move forward in the story of Nehemiah and see what roles that he plays. And we're going to look at some sources and try to make sense of the timeline discrepancies between Josephus and the rest of historians and the Bible. And I think that's going to be super fun as well. But long story short, yes, we have a little bit of a conundrum. Yes, we have a little bit of a quagmire. We'll sift through that tomorrow. But more importantly, this show's getting on the road. Nehemiah's got his resources, he's got his cavalry, he's got his officers, he's got his little pieces of hardened clay with notes on it from the king, and he's off and running. He's a man of action. He's already in Jerusalem and getting things sorted out there, making waves, causing problems, getting people upset. We're going to learn more about the people who are upset next time around. All right, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.